To BBC News, the stepbrother of the schoolgirl Becky Watts has been found guilty of her murder. 28-year-old Nathan Matthews suffocated 16-year-old Becky while trying to kidnap her from her home in Bristol in February. Her dismembered body was found in a garden shed. His girlfriend Shauna Hoare was acquitted of murder today, but found guilty of manslaughter.
She's your typical teenage girl. Lots of selfies, music, fashion.
Becky's father and stepmother told me today that her disappearance is completely out of character, and they are desperate for news.
Bex, if you can see this, get in contact. And if anyone out there knows something, just tell us. Just bring her home safe. If you've got her, then put her somewhere we can find her. We want her home, please.
She's not in trouble. She's just wanted here. We just want her back. That's all we want.
Becky Watts, who's 16, was last seen at her Bristol home.
It's the last point of reference that we can actually place her at. And clearly we're trying to look at what happened after she left.
It's 5 days since Becky left her home in the St George area of Bristol with just her laptop and a phone. Police say nobody has heard from her since then.
Friends, family, and the people that are really dearest to her, that I would expect her to have regular contact with, at least one of those people, we've had no contact with her, so we really are very concerned about her well-being.
Shauna heard the door go, so she was assuming it was Becky going out.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming it was Becky going out.
Okay. No one saw her go, but
no.
Just heard the door go,
yeah.
And the assumption that Becky had left.
Yeah.
The door slammed. Everyone assumed Becky had walked out, but she never left that house alive. On Friday, February 20th, 2015, a desperate call was made to emergency services in Bristol, England. A 16-year-old girl was missing. Her name was Rebecca Marie Watts. Most people called her Becky. She had not taken spare clothes. She had not taken money. She had not told anyone where she was going. And more disturbing than anything else, every screen that normally connected her to the world had gone silent. No texts, no calls, no social media, nothing. For a shy teenager who was constantly in touch with her small circle of friends, that silence was not normal. At first, police were looking for a missing girl. Then they found blood outside her bedroom, and in that blood, they found a fingerprint. It belonged to someone inside the family. Stay with me, because this case is not just about a missing teenager. It is about a lie told perfectly enough to fool an entire household. A stepbrother who said he only wanted to scare her. A girlfriend who claimed she knew nothing. A house where one room was too clean. A receipt from a hardware store that changed everything. And a murder so calculated, so intimate, and so grotesque that even experienced detectives said it would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Before the investigation, before the courtroom, before the terrible discovery in a garden shed, Becky Watts was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a 16-year-old girl trying to find her place in the world. Becky was born on June 3rd, 1998, in Bristol. Her parents, Darren and Tanya, separated before she was born. In her early years, Becky lived with her mother, but later, after concerns about neglect, she and her brother Dan went to live with their father. Darren eventually began a relationship with Angie Galsworthy. Angie became Becky's stepmother, and from the time Becky was very young, she became part of that blended family. People who loved Becky described her in a way that feels painfully vivid now. She could be shy at school, quiet with people she did not know. But around the people she trusted, she was funny, cheeky, sharp, full of warmth. Her teachers described her as caring and kind, the kind of student with a huge heart. Her friends were few, but close. She was not the type of teenager who constantly disappeared or pushed boundaries by staying out all night. She liked her phone, music, makeup, fashion, her laptop, her tablet, and her online world. In other words, she was 16. A teenager with a small universe, but a universe that mattered. and that is why her disappearance immediately felt wrong to the people who actually knew her. On Thursday, February 19, 2015, Becky was at the family home on Crown Hill in the St. George area of Bristol. Her stepmother Angie left the house around 11:15 that morning for a hospital appointment. At that point, Becky was believed to be upstairs in her bedroom. Also at the house that morning were Nathan Matthews and his girlfriend Shauna Hoare. Nathan was Angie's son. That made him Becky's stepbrother. He was 10 years older than her. He did not live in the house, but he had known Becky since she was a small child. Shauna was Nathan's partner, and the couple had a young daughter together. To the outside world, they were family. Not perfect, not especially close, but family. And that is exactly what made what happened next so difficult for the people around Becky to accept. Because the first version of the story came from Nathan and Shauna. They said they had been in the house. They said they heard the front door slam. They said they assumed Becky had left, not saw her leave, not spoke to her, not watched her walk out, heard a door, assumed. That single assumption became the foundation of the first missing person investigation. Becky was believed to have left the house, but no one could prove she had, and no one would ever see her alive again. By the next day, Friday, February 20th, the alarm inside the family had grown louder. Friends were contacting the family, asking where Becky was. Her boyfriend had tried to reach her. Her friends had not heard from her. No one knew where she was. Darren made an emotional appeal on Facebook, saying Becky had gone missing on Thursday and asking anyone who had seen or heard from her to let the family know she was safe. Then, around 4 p.m., the emergency call was made. A missing child case began. At first, police had to consider every possibility. Had Becky run away? Had she gone to meet someone? Was she with a friend? Was she being hidden by someone? But certain details did not fit a runaway theory. Her money was still there. Her clothes were still there. She had made no plan. She had said nothing to anyone, and her digital life had stopped. That mattered. Because for a teenager, silence can be evidence. Becky's phone, laptop, and tablet were missing from the house, but they were not being used in any normal way. Her social media accounts were inactive. The friends she would usually contact heard nothing. To detectives, that silence was alarming. Detective Chief Inspector Richard O'Cone would later explain that ordinary missing teen cases happen frequently. Many teenagers are found quickly. They go to friends. They return home. They make contact. But Becky's case had a different feel from the beginning. The phones, the social media, the lack of money, the lack of clothing, the sudden disappearance from a home where no one actually saw her leave. All of it pointed toward the possibility that something had happened before anyone even realized she was missing. Still, in those first days, the public search was for a living girl. Police appealed through the media. Her father and grandmother appeared in public asking for her return. The hashtag #FindBecky began spreading online and reached millions. Friends, family members, and volunteers searched open spaces, parks, woodland, and local areas around Bristol. Troopers Hill, St. George's Park, Barton Hill, Southmead, Fish Ponds, Badock's Wood. Search teams went door to door. Police asked the public for information about a black Vauxhall Zafira seen during the relevant period. And inside Becky's family, hope and dread existed side by side. Maybe she was somewhere. Maybe someone knew something. Maybe she could still walk back through the door. But the investigators were already turning inward, because in a missing person case, the last known location matters. And Becky's last known location was not a park, not a bus stop, not a shopping center. It was her own home. So detectives began building what they call victimology. Who was Becky? What did she like? Who were her friends? Who did she talk to? What was normal for her? What was not? They interviewed friends, family, and anyone who might have had contact with her. And very quickly, two names became important: Nathan Matthews, Shauna Hoare. They were not suspects yet in the formal sense. They were significant witnesses. They had been at the house on the morning Becky disappeared. They were among the last people known to be connected to her final confirmed location. But even getting them to come in for interviews was harder than investigators expected. That alone raised concern. If a 16-year-old family member is missing, detectives expect urgency, concern, cooperation. But Nathan and Shauna seemed difficult to pin down. And once they did speak, something about them felt wrong. Not enough to arrest them. Not enough to prove anything. But enough for experienced investigators to take notice. Shauna appeared relaxed, almost light. At moments, she seemed too casual for the situation. Nathan seemed comfortable, calm, at ease in the interview room. The kind of ease that can make investigators wonder whether a person is confident because they have nothing to hide, or confident because they believe they have already prepared the perfect story. And that story was exactly the problem. Nathan and Shauna's accounts matched. Too well. They both described being at the house. They both described hearing the door. They both described assuming Becky had left. Their versions were neat, organized, convenient. But real memory is usually messy. Even honest witnesses who experience the same event often remember different details. Times shift, sequences change, small inconsistencies appear. That is normal. In this case, the accounts lined up so cleanly that detectives began to suspect collusion, not proof, but suspicion. The kind of suspicion that tells an investigator, they have talked about this, they have rehearsed it, they want us to believe a door slam. Still, the police needed evidence. Instinct does not solve a murder, and at that point officially, Becky was still missing. So forensic teams returned to the house on Crown Hill. They searched carefully. They were not looking for dramatic evidence. They were looking for anything out of place. And near the doorframe of Becky's bedroom, they found something easy to miss. Small reddish marks, possible blood, some low, some around waist height, some higher up, closer to shoulder height. That pattern immediately raised questions. Why would there be blood there? Why at different heights? Had there been a struggle? Had someone been moved through the doorway? Inside the staining, forensic officers saw ridge detail, a fingerprint. Now the case had a physical clue. But at first they did not know whose blood it was, and they did not know whose fingerprint it was. The result came back in stages. First, the fingerprint. Nathan Matthews, Becky's stepbrother, the man who said he had only heard the door slam. Then came the DNA. The blood was Becky's. That was the first major turn in the case. The last known location was the family home. The story was that Becky had left, but her blood was on the doorframe outside her bedroom, and Nathan's fingerprint was in it. Now the question changed. If Becky walked out of the house that morning, why was her blood there? And why was Nathan's finger in it? Police decided that if Becky was still alive, time was everything. They arrested Nathan and Shauna on suspicion of kidnapping. That charge was strategic. If Becky had been taken and was being held somewhere, detectives needed urgent leverage. They needed to question the last people who may have known where she was. They needed to keep them apart. They needed to search their home. And they needed to do all of it fast. Nathan and Shauna were arrested on February 28, 2015. At that point, the hope that Becky might still be alive had not completely disappeared. But it was fading. The police searched the home Nathan and Shauna shared in the Warmley area, not far from Becky's house. What they found inside did not immediately reveal Becky, but it revealed something about the home. It was chaotic, cluttered, packed with belongings. So full of objects that even moving through the property was difficult. The front door barely opened because of items behind it. Rooms were messy. The kitchen and living areas were crowded. The entire place had the feeling of disorder, except for one thing, the bathtub. In the upstairs bathroom, the bath was immaculate, shining, spotless, so clean it seemed to glow against the disorder around it. To an ordinary person, that might seem like nothing. To a detective inside a cluttered house connected to a missing girl, it was a warning. Why was everything else filthy or overloaded with objects, but the bath was polished? What had been cleaned there? At that point, investigators still did not have the answer, but soon, 2 pieces of paper would push the case into something far darker. During the search, police found receipts from B&Q, a hardware store. The receipts showed that on the Friday after Becky was last seen alive, Nathan had purchased a circular saw, protective gloves, goggles, and a face mask. CCTV confirmed the purchase. Think about that timing. Becky was reported missing on Friday. Nathan, the last significant person linked to the house, had Becky's blood and his fingerprint at her bedroom door. And on that same Friday, he bought tools and protective equipment that investigators feared could be used to dismember a body. That was the moment the case truly turned. The missing person investigation became a murder investigation. For Becky's family, the news was devastating. Until then, even fear had left space for hope. But now the police were telling them that the people they suspected were not strangers, not predators from the street, not someone hiding in the unknown. They were Nathan and Shauna, family. People who had sat in the house after Becky vanished. People who had acted normal while the family panicked. People who had told everyone they heard a door slam. Now, Nathan and Shauna were rearrested on suspicion of murder. In the interview room, police still did not reveal everything they knew. They did not immediately show Nathan the receipts. They did not tell him the full extent of what the search had found. Instead, they applied pressure carefully. They hinted, they asked, they let him wonder. What had they found? What did they know? How much of the story had already collapsed? Nathan had a choice: keep denying, stop talking, or give a version that admitted just enough to control the damage. On March 3, 2015, he gave a prepared statement through his lawyer. He did not want to hear it read aloud. He covered his ears. But the words were read into the interview record. In that statement, Nathan admitted responsibility for Becky's death. But he framed it as a plan gone wrong. He said he and Shauna had gone to the Crown Hill house in his car. He said he had a large bag, a stun device, handcuffs, tape, a mask. He claimed he had developed the idea of kidnapping Becky to scare her, to teach her a lesson. He said he believed she was selfish and that the way she treated his mother put stress on Angie's health. According to him, Shauna went into the garden to smoke. He went to the car, retrieved the bag of items, went upstairs and knocked on Becky's door. He said Becky answered. He asked to speak with her. Then, he said, he used the items to overpower her. During a brief struggle, his mask slipped. Becky saw his face. He panicked. He strangled her while she was partly inside the bag. That was his version. A kidnapping designed to scare her. A panic when she recognized him. An accidental killing. A girlfriend conveniently outside. But police did not accept it at face value. Because prepared statements often do 2 things at once. They admit what can no longer be denied, and they hide what still can be hidden. Nathan's statement placed him at the center of Becky's death, but it minimized intent, it minimized violence, and most importantly, it tried to protect Shauna. The investigators did not believe Shauna was innocent. They believed she was deeply involved, but proving it would be difficult. Nathan's statement continued. After killing Becky, he admitted that he bought the circular saw and used it to dismember her body in the bath at his home, the same bath that had looked unnaturally clean. He said he wrapped body parts, placed them into boxes and bags, and hid them in a shed near his home. Police then moved to a property in Barton Court, Barton Hill. There, in a garden shed, they found the remains of Rebecca Watts. The discovery was horrific. Her body had been dismembered and concealed in containers, bags, and packaging. Cat litter had been used to absorb fluids. Salt crystals had been used in an attempt to control odor. The search for a missing girl had ended in a garden shed. And for the family, the devastation was almost impossible to comprehend. They had spent 12 days imagining every possibility, hoping, dreading, searching. Now they had to face the fact that Becky had never left the house alive, and worse, that people inside their own extended family had killed her, hidden her, and sat beside them while they begged for her return. The post-mortem evidence was deeply disturbing. The prosecution later said Becky was suffocated in her bedroom. Evidence suggested she fought. She suffered numerous injuries. After death, she was stabbed multiple times. Her remains had to be identified by DNA. This is the part of the case that must be handled carefully, not because it should be hidden, but because the horror is not the point. The point is what it reveals. Becky did not simply vanish. She was attacked in her own home. She fought. She was killed by someone she knew. Then her body was treated as a problem to be solved. Moved, cut up, wrapped, stored, concealed. And all the while, Nathan and Shauna pretended to help. That deception became one of the most chilling parts of the investigation. On the day Becky was killed, after the attack, Nathan and Shauna remained at the Crown Hill house for hours. Other family members came home. Becky's boyfriend arrived, worried because she was not responding. Shauna answered the door and pretended to check Becky's bedroom. Later, Nathan and Shauna left with Becky's body hidden in the car. They returned home. They dismembered her in the bath. Then, according to the timeline presented in the case, they ordered food and carried on. The next days showed a pattern of concealment. They bought cleaning supplies, bags, plastic wrap, bleach, sponges, tape. They watched a YouTube video with a title suggesting how to hide a body. They moved packages. They contacted people. They created distance. They acted as if they were just another worried part of the family. Shauna even shared Darren's public appeal about Becky's disappearance. That is what makes this case so psychologically disturbing. The lie was not passive. It was performed. They did not simply stay silent. They participated in the world that was searching for the girl they already knew was dead. After Nathan's confession, the police still needed to prove Shauna's role. She insisted she had only learned of Nathan's responsibility the day before. She said she had not touched Becky, not alive, not dead. She said she knew nothing. But investigators believed the story was impossible. If Nathan had killed Becky, transported her body, dismembered her, cleaned up, packaged remains, moved them, bought supplies, lied to family, and maintained a cover story, how could Shauna, who was with him throughout key parts of that period, know nothing? The question was not only whether she had lied. She clearly had. The question was whether she had participated in the kidnapping, the killing, or the aftermath. The first charge against Shauna was perverting the course of justice. That allowed police to keep building the case. They searched digital devices, phones, computers, deleted messages, internet history. And what they found shifted the understanding of motive. Messages between Nathan and Shauna showed discussions about young girls, schoolgirls, and the idea of abducting a young female and taking her home. Some of the messages had been deleted, but forensic analysts recovered them. In one message from December 2014, Nathan asked Shauna to bring him back pretty schoolgirls. In another, Shauna described seeing a small, pretty girl and joked about almost knocking her out and bringing her home. Shauna later tried to explain the messages as sarcastic or unfortunate. But in the context of Becky's death, they looked very different. They suggested that the planned kidnapping was not simply about teaching Becky a lesson. The prosecution argued it had a sexual motive, that Nathan and Shauna had a shared unnatural interest in teenage girls, and that Becky, 16, small, vulnerable, and already disliked by Nathan, became the target. This was one of the prosecution's most important points. Nathan wanted the court to believe this was a cruel but non-sexual plan to scare Becky. The state argued the messages showed something far more disturbing, a fantasy, a plan, a shared fixation. And then there was the physical evidence linking Shauna to the aftermath. DNA connected her to items found with Becky's remains. Her DNA was found on a mask, and on a bag containing body parts. That did not prove she placed her hands on Becky during the killing, but it directly contradicted her claim that she never came near Becky, alive or dead. Eventually, Shauna Hoare was also charged with murder. The trial began at Bristol Crown Court on October 6, 2015. The courtroom heard weeks of evidence. Some of it was so upsetting that even the judge later acknowledged how difficult it had been for everyone, especially Becky's family. The prosecution's case was that Becky had been killed during a sexually motivated kidnap plot carried out by Nathan and Shauna. They argued that Nathan and Shauna went to the house knowing Becky would be alone. They bought batteries for stun devices before arriving. Nathan parked with the boot facing the house. They brought items associated with restraint and disguise. They overpowered Becky in her bedroom. They killed her. They hid the body in the car while the family returned. Then they transported her body and dismembered it at their home. The prosecution presented CCTV from stores: Tesco, B&Q, Asda, other shops. It showed purchases that aligned with the plan and the cover-up: batteries, the saw, protective gear, cleaning products, plastic wrap, bags, bleach. These were not random errands. To the prosecution, they were steps in a crime. Nathan admitted he killed Becky, but denied murder. He pleaded guilty to manslaughter. His version was that he only wanted to frighten her. He said he panicked when the mask slipped. He insisted Shauna was not involved in the killing. Shauna denied murder and claimed ignorance. She said the messages were not serious. She said she feared Nathan. She said she did not know what had happened until later. But the prosecution told the jury they had acted together. A team. Two people bound by the same fantasy, the same lies, and the same attempt to hide what they had done. During the trial, the jury heard about Nathan's hostility toward Becky. He disliked the way she spoke to his mother. He thought she was rude. He had minimized her struggles in the past. Becky had suffered from an eating disorder as a teenager, and Nathan reportedly dismissed it as attention-seeking. The court also heard that Becky had once told a friend that Nathan had described in disturbing detail how he would kill her. She had not told her family. That detail is haunting because it sits in the space between teenage fear and adult disbelief. How many things do young people say to friends because they do not know how to make adults understand? How many warnings disappear because they sound too strange, too dramatic, or too difficult to process? The trial also examined Shauna's background with Nathan. Nathan had brought Shauna into the family years earlier, claiming she was older than she really was. She was 15. Darren had objected to it. The relationship continued anyway. Over time, Nathan and Shauna built a life together, had a child, and developed a private world that investigators would later describe as deeply disturbing. The jury had to decide not whether they were unpleasant people, not whether their fantasies were grotesque, but whether they had conspired to kidnap Becky, whether Nathan murdered her, and whether Shauna was criminally responsible for her death. On November 11, 2015, after just over 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned its verdicts. Nathan Matthews was found guilty of murder. Shauna Hoare was acquitted of murder, but found guilty of manslaughter. Both were convicted of conspiracy to kidnap, perverting the course of justice, preventing the lawful burial of a body, and possession of stun guns. The jury had rejected Nathan's attempt to reduce the killing to an accident, and it had rejected Shauna's claim that she had no meaningful involvement. The sentencing came 2 days later. Nathan Matthews was given a life sentence with a minimum term of 33 years. Shauna Hoare was sentenced to 17 years in prison. The judge accepted that the kidnap plot had a sexual purpose. He described Nathan's fixation on petite teenage girls and said Hoare had been drawn into that fixation. He also paid tribute to Becky's family for the dignity they showed through a trial no family should ever have to endure. Nathan and Shauna later appealed their convictions and sentences. In June 2016, the Court of Appeal rejected those challenges. The convictions stood. The sentences stood. Legally, the case was over. But emotionally, it could never be over for Becky's family, because this was not a stranger attack. This was not a person hiding in an alley. This was a crime committed inside the family circle. Darren had to accept that his daughter had been murdered by the son of the woman he loved. Angie had to live with the fact that her son had killed the girl she had helped raise. And the marriage between Darren and Angie somehow survived a pressure most people cannot even imagine. Darren later said that his love for Angie never wavered, that if this did not break them apart, nothing would. That statement is almost impossible to hear without understanding the complexity of grief. Because everyone in that family lost something. Darren lost his daughter. Angie lost the life she thought she had with both her husband and her son. Dan lost his sister. Tanya lost her daughter. The community lost a young girl whose name became known across the country for the worst possible reason. And Becky lost everything. After the trial, a serious case review examined professional involvement with Becky in the years before her death. The review found no evidence that the murder could have been predicted or prevented by professionals working with her. But it also found that services around her had been fragmented, that communication had not been good enough, and that there had not been enough attention on the wider family context, including Nathan and Shauna. That matters. Because even when a crime cannot be predicted, a victim's life can still reveal lessons about how adults, agencies, and communities see vulnerable teenagers. Becky had been seen by professionals. She had experienced anxiety. She had a difficult past. She had been treated at times as challenging rather than vulnerable. The review did not say professionals could have stopped Nathan and Shauna. It did say that the picture around Becky was incomplete. That is often how risk hides, not in one massive red flag, but in fragments no one puts together. In 2016, a memorial bench was unveiled near Becky's home. A mural was painted. Her father later wrote a book about her life, her murder, and the trial. A community that had searched for her came together to remember her. There were vigils, balloons, silent tributes. Football matches paused in her memory. People lined streets. People lit candles. People wanted the family to know that Becky had not been reduced to the way she died. She had lived. She had mattered. She had been loved. And that is where the story has to return. Not to the saw, not to the shed, not to the lies Nathan and Shauna told, to Becky, Rebecca Marie Watts, a 16-year-old girl who loved her friends, who could be shy in school and funny at home, who had a sharp sense of humor, who was described by her family as a tornado, a hurricane, and a ray of sunshine all at once. A girl who could walk into your life and make you feel alive. That is who was taken. That is who the headlines almost buried beneath the horror. In 2023, reports stated that Shauna Hoare had been released from prison after serving part of her sentence, a development that caused anger and pain for Becky's mother. Nathan Matthews remains imprisoned under a life sentence with a minimum term of 33 years. But no release date, no appeal, no legal update can change the central truth. Becky was 16. She was killed in her own home by someone who should never have been a danger to her, and the people who loved her spent days searching for a girl who was already gone because the killers were sitting inside the search, helping perform the lie. That is what makes this case so cold. Not only the violence, the performance, the calm interviews, the fake concern, the shared Facebook posts, the ordinary shopping trips, the food orders, the clean bathtub in a filthy house. The door slam everyone was meant to believe. In the end, the investigation broke through that lie because detectives refused to accept the easy version. They listened to what was missing. They noticed what was too neat. They looked at the blood, the fingerprint, the receipts, the bathtub, the deleted messages, the DNA, and piece by piece, the story Nathan and Shauna built collapsed. But the collapse came too late to save Becky. And that is the wound at the center of this case. A family wanted her home. A city searched for her. Police raced against time, hoping she might still be alive. But Becky had never walked out of that house. The door slam was not an exit. It was the beginning of a cover story. So the final question is not just how Nathan Matthews and Shauna Hoare could do this. It is how well a lie can work when it comes from someone close enough to be trusted. How many times do we believe a simple explanation because the alternative is too horrific to face? And how many victims are hidden behind the ordinary words, "She must have gone out"? If Becky's story stays with you, leave your thoughts below. And remember her not only for the crime that took her life, but for the life she had before it. Because Becky Watts was not just the girl in the missing poster. She was not just the victim in a courtroom. She was loved. She was funny. She was creative. She was 16, and she should have had the rest of her life. Thank you to everyone who watched this video. We truly hope this story mattered to you. And if you'd like to support the channel and help us continue creating content, please like the video, leave a comment, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Your support really makes a difference, and we genuinely appreciate every person who helps keep these stories from being forgotten.